Yeah.
Meu Lula não aparece.
Good afternoon. I see we're on the air now. Hello, everybody.
Hi. We are here today to celebrate Lula's birthday. Thank you, Brian. This is the second annual Lula Day. Lula Day was created as an international effort to bring awareness of Lula's imprisonment, the fight for his freedom, and restoration of his political rights. But it's also an opportunity to educate ourselves about the struggles for a more just society and a tentative way to stimulate political movements for changes. With that in mind, we have invited Brian MIER and David GRISCOM to talk to us. We believe that your work to inform Americans about the lawfare against Lula is vital. In fact, we think that TMBS is the media outlet in the US with the most thorough understanding of what is happening in Brazil and Latin America and its implications for the American people, especially for the working class and the poor. I want to introduce you Brian MIER, a geographer, the editor of Brazil Wire, and a contributor to Telesur and TV 247. David
Hi,
Griscom,
thanks. Okay.
yes,
Sorry about that.
It's
that's
okay.
okay. And David Griscom, a political analyst at the Michael Brooks Show and Jacobin. I'm Sonia Silva from Collective AlertaNYC, and this is my friend Cristina Mocelin. Thank you for being here.
Yes, hi. So I'm Cristina Mocelin, an activist with the Brazilian, an activist with the AlertaNYC. So in Brazil, it has been widely reported, at least in the alternative media, right, about interference of the US in the internal affairs of Brazil during the progressive government of the Workers' Party, PT. So as we know, with the NSA spying of former President Dilma Rousseff, which contributed to the coup d'etat against her, and also contributed to the imprisonment of former President Lula. So Brian, this question is for you. Is the lawfare against Lula relevant to Americans, right? And what should Americans know about it?
Okay, well, lawfare, first of all, it's a process in which the law and the mechanisms of the law are misused to annihilate a political opponent, okay? And so this is important to know that it wasn't just the NSA spying. There's a law called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which arose out of Watergate, but that throughout the years it's been refined and refined and refined to the point where since about 2002, any country that becomes a signatory to the FCPA grants the US Department of Justice autonomy to act within their country in investigations in partnership with local authorities. So we know, no, this isn't, it's really maddening the way that the Anglo media has ignored this issue and acted as if it were a kind of conspiracy theory or something to say that the US helped coordinate and was actively involved in the processes behind the 2016 coup and Lula's political imprisonment on charges that he had committed indeterminate acts of corruption, meaning they couldn't even name what he'd done to pull him out of the electoral process by throwing him in jail. It's hardly a kind of conspiracy theory because you can go, since 2016, you've been able to go on the US Department of Justice's own website and read about it. And the US Department of Justice and the SEC have collected billions of dollars of fines from Brazilian companies through Operation Car Wash, which they themselves say they have been a partner with all along. Now, recently, like 2 months ago, in partnership with Intercept Brazil, there was a 5-part investigative journalism piece by A Pública, which is it's an indie media outlet in Brazil, which has a pretty big following on social media and stuff, in which the Intercept shared some of the leaked Telegram messages that they had obtained from the Lava Jato prosecutors, and they discovered that for 5 years, every 2 weeks, the Lava Jato task force in Curitiba was meeting with a group of 18 FBI agents to talk about the case. So it's not just a case of like, okay, the U.S. was a partner because Odebrecht company had some offices in the U.S. and they were investigating Odebrecht in Florida or something like that. No, the U.S. The PT party's official position on this is that the United States Department of Justice created Lava Jato and coordinated Lava Jato. They weren't a minor partner in this. Now, this is important for Americans because the same tactics that they were using, the Southern New York District, Department of Justice office was using to put Lula in jail, to destroy the rule of law in the United States, and to open the door for a neo-fascist Jair Bolsonaro to take power, okay? The same tactics can be used inside of the United States. And so we saw that, in fact, Valeska Martins, who's one of Lula's defense lawyers, in her book Lawfare, she talks about this. Like, everything they did to Lula, they tried out against Senator Ted Stevens in Alaska in 2009. He was also accused of getting illegal reforms on a vacation property, and then it destroyed his political career. And then the Department of Justice was ordered to reverse all charges because it turned out that the prosecutors were hiding evidence beneficial to the defense. And this trial against Ted Stevens was also done through all these leaks to the media. They created this media witch hunt, which is exactly what they did in Brazil against Lula. Okay, and Ted Stevens was a Republican. So this shows that he was a Republican who was against privatization of Alaska's oil. This just shows that the same tactics that were used against Lula could and probably would be used against someone like Bernie Sanders if he were elected president, or another progressive. So it's important to know, the tactics and how the U.S. acted, and also I think it's an existential responsibility as an American leftist, to care when your government is interfering in processes to take down left governments in Latin America. So I think, and the thing that's annoying is like everyone who's a journalist covering what's been going on in Brazil for the last 5 years knows that the U.S. has been involved in this process. So in not talking about it, you're doing a tremendous disservice, not just to Brazil, but to the left in general. And that's what I'll say for now. Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to point out one thing that you made me remind me. When Joe Biden was vice president, he went to Dilma Rousseff to give the CIA documents that showed American interference in the coup of 1964. So it's documented. It's in the history, right? So, and it's a process that it's repeating itself.
Yeah. And I think this is a great segue for the question that I'm going to ask David, right? It is, it seems that we see that in the U.S. the history of this practice of destabilization of governments, right? Particularly in Latin America, it is kind of like a broader foreign policy, right? And so, largely driven, as Brian was saying, by economic interests of big companies, right? Big pharma, big oil industry. So my question for you, David, it is how this practice is, I think Brian starts saying, but if you can expand on this, end up affecting American people, right? And end up affecting the US democracy itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Just first of all, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be in conversation with all of you all, and it's great to be talking with Brian. And we've been covering this on my outlet at TMBS for a very long time because it does have very significant effects, not just on Americans, but the world in general. The first thing I would note is as Frantz Fanon teaches us, we have to remember when it does come to these destabilization regimes, you also do need a energetic national bourgeoisie, a right wing in those countries to be able to go forward with these destabilization efforts. And it's important for us on the left to start thinking about, politics in that kind of class level, right? Where we're understanding that there is a bourgeoisie in these other countries that is wanting to take advantage of the opportunity that you get from American intervention and destabilization. it's a very American history, obviously. From 1947 to 1989, the United States tried to overthrow governments in 66 covert operations, and 6 overt times. And we haven't moved away from that period. In fact, I think that the United States is almost becoming more and more aggressive and explicit in their activities in the rest of the world. Lawfare and what happened in Brazil is a great example of that, and also what happened in Bolivia over this past year. There's no doubt about it that the United States is involved in these movements, and just the fact that the United States State Department is coming in immediately, for example, and recognizing the coup government in Bolivia, it's just showing that the United States is very much playing this game. Why are they doing this? It's because we're seeing this crisis of global capitalism right now, and it's been going on for a very long time. But the return on production has become lower and lower and lower. Production is becoming a more difficult way for capitalists to make money, which is why you've seen this kind of decoupling from actual productive economics into more and more speculative assets. That's why you see such a fixation on the stock market, for example, with the United States. So you're seeing that domestically. But another great way to make money, if you're a capitalist, is to be able to cannibalize old markets, or to be able to capture things that were publicly owned and privatize them. And in my opinion, that has been one of the major factors of the most recent examples of American intervention in Brazil and in Bolivia as well. Because you look at at Car Wash and the accusations there, not only was it trying to destroy a popularly elected left-wing government, but it was a war on publicly owned state-run firms. So much of the rhetoric was fixated on the idea that you can't have state-run programs because they are just going to be very corrupt, and they're not going to be able to help out people, and they're going to they're just going to be inefficient. That's neoliberal American style capitalism that is trying to use people's anger about ideas like corruption, so that American companies and private business owners can come in and cannibalize markets that are owned by people, by a government, by a community. So this is something that's really important, not only for people in those countries, but for the American working class as well, because that is because we're seeing right now a complete separation between a class of people, a global class that has benefited immensely from the past 20 to 30 years of hyper neoliberal capitalism, and a complete destruction of working class lives. And people in the United States, the working people in this country, really need to understand that this is a global fight, that the same characters who are acting in Bolivia and in Brazil are also working against them in this country. And one project that I'm really hoping to start working on is building that kind of class solidarity across borders, because if especially the American left, and Brazil was such an example that's very frustrating, because there was a long period of time before you really even saw many outlets, left-wing socialist outlets, really talking about what's happening in Brazil, and similar, with Bolivia as well. We have to step up a lot, the U.S. left, the socialist left, in trying to build a kind of awareness as to what's happening in the world, and specifically the American role in it. Because if we can't start pressuring our government here, we need to be like the first line in trying to help out our comrades across the globe and be able to push back against American imperialism and hegemony. And that needs to be, front and center in our politics here.
That's right. I'm going to turn to you again, David. And this year, we know the Nobel Peace Prize was given to the World Food Program, and for its efforts to combat hunger and promote food security. We are living a dramatic situation now with the pandemic and an increasing number of people living on the brink of starvation worldwide. So David, it is unthinkable that the US, as the richest country in the world, still has so many of its people living in poverty. And with the pandemic, more than 12 million people are out of work, and today 55 million Americans live in poverty. And more families are going hungry, and women and people of color have been hit harder. So Why can't the U.S. address this crucial issue, and who do you think benefits from it?
Hmm. Well, yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, we are in this really unique period in global capitalism where there is this glut regarding profitability and production. And what that means is if you are a capitalist, if you're, somebody who benefits basically by exploiting other people's labor, if you're getting a smaller return on, you're getting less profits through production, that means that you need to start squeezing people more and more. And in the United States, you've seen this destruction uh, um, of the benefits and the protections that workers won 100 years ago. I mean, you're seeing this with companies like Uber and Lyft, which are trying to redefine how we categorize workers in order to prevent them from being able to get things like paid sick leave, overtime, etc. So we're definitely seeing this very harsh form of capitalism developing in the United States, and the fact that we have so much poverty and hunger in the United States is very much by design. It's not an accident. The United States, it produces an incredible amount of food, and we have pretty developed distribution networks. But it's very important to have a class of people in the society who are always afraid that they will fall into unemployment, to be unable to provide for themselves. And also in the United States specifically, that fear is much more serious when you realize that you don't really have a strong social safety net to take care of people. This pandemic has really laid bare that failure in the United States to have any kind of safety net. Not only is the American government not doing enough, but even what they were trying to do with this like $1,200 stimulus payment, it was a disaster. And why is that? It's because any kind of social service programs that would be, rooted in a community that would be able to distribute things like that has been so destroyed through years and years of neoliberal capitalism that the United States' actual functional ability to just provide basic benefits to people, it was an uphill task. So and it's going to get a little bit more difficult. I'm sorry to be gloom about this, but as we start to see these unemployment benefits dry up, it's going to get much more difficult for American, working class American people to be able to provide for themselves because so many people still are out of work. And I think we can look to what Lula was able to do in Brazil in conquering, and fighting hunger there, because what was so great about Lula's approach was not just that it's like, okay, let's provide people food, but also let's look at all of the other factors that result in hunger. And those are poverty, those are distribution networks that are inefficient, those are lack of infrastructure and things like that. And you have to have that kind of perspective if you want to be able to provide these benefits and to provide them in the long term. So in the United States, I think we could go back to there is a proud tradition in this country from the New Deal of being able to say, okay, we're going to radically shift and change this country, provide for people. Looking to something like that, looking to what Lula was able to build is definitely a great example of that. Also, in the United States, a Green New Deal could be a great opportunity to say, okay, we're going to radically decarbonize our economy and try to have a green economy, but also let's address poverty. Let's address lack of education opportunities for people. Let's address food deserts. I mean, there are large parts of this country where you have one grocery store and there's no fresh produce, especially across rural America. It is very dire, and it's one of these ridiculous ironies, cruel ironies of capitalism, that you have communities that are farming communities, that are growing food for export globally. And then the people living in those communities don't have access to fresh fruit and vegetables and a healthy diet, right? We really need to reimagine our whole system here. And we have to be really bold. Luckily, there are great examples of doing that from Brazil to, even the United States, under the New Deal.
Excellent. Actually, this is, I'm going to turn to Brian now with this approach, right? So, Brian, you have been living in Brazil for many years now. And can you tell us about the programs by Lula and PT that eradicated extreme poverty in Brazil? And we also know that you have worked with the MST, Movement of Landless Workers, right? What can you tell us about its role in promoting food justice to fight hunger and promote sustainable farming?
Okay, that's a couple questions rolled up into one. First, I would just like to respond to something that David said, though, about Frantz Fanon, who's also one of my heroes. It's really important to always mention, when you're talking about U.S. imperialism, the role of this local, what Fanon called comprador bourgeoisie class, who in Portuguese we call entreguistas. They're local business elites who make money off of facilitating access to natural resources by the foreign capitalist class. Now, I'm frequently accused, when I start talking about US involvement in the coup in 2016, of not recognizing Brazilian people's agency. And I think this is a term that is used by people who are trying to spread confusion in the left about US role abroad, because you have to take into consideration everything. There's multiple causes for coups, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. I don't believe that the US could have pulled off the 2016 coup and Lula's imprisonment by itself. Obviously, there's a lot of collaborators on the Brazilian side, okay? Regarding Lula's and the PT government's successful eradication of hunger, in the international media, a lot of attention was given to Bolsa Familia, which was this kind of minimal, small welfare system that the Lula government established, giving like $100 and something a month to the poorest families in the country. And like the Bretton Woods institutions liked it, the World Bank liked it. They started trying to push watered down copies of it to countries in Africa. Like I know that Ghana started something through World Bank help in which they were giving like $30 a month to the poorest families or something. It's important to note that despite all of what, Anglo journalists and academics and everything say about this program Bolsa Familia, that the biggest study on poverty and hunger reduction in Brazil that was ever conducted was conducted by a governmental economic research think tank called IPEA. And they did a longitudinal study, and they said that in terms of causality in reducing hunger and poverty, this Bolsa Familia project was a distant third. The most important factor in reducing poverty and hunger in Brazil was these massive increases in minimum wage that were executed by the PT governments. When Lula took office, the minimum wage was like $49 a month in dollar terms. When Dilma left office, it was like 300. Now the real had increased in value during this time. So in real terms, inside of Brazil, it still represented more than doubling of the minimum wage. And this is very important to the Americans, to the United States, because I get so frustrated watching the Democrats fail to counter this stupid Republican argument about how raising the minimum wage would hurt small business owners, would drive up inflation, would cause unemployment and things like that, because there's some very basic, economic facts that show that this is never the case. And one of these is the fact that when more money goes into the hands of the poor and working class, it has a multiplying effect, because poor and working class people are much more likely to spend their money locally than the rich, who normally like ferret it offshore to offshore fiscal paradise accounts. So in the case of Brazil, none of this that Trump was talking about with Biden in the last debate about these horrible, scary effects of raising the minimum wage, none of it happened at all. To the contrary, it was a huge boost to small businesses, because the people living in the neighborhoods where these small businesses were located had more money to spend at them. It increased employment, and it greatly reduced poverty, and it's the main factor in reducing, removing like 40 million people from below the poverty line. Now, in addition to that, and the second factor was linking the retirement pension to the minimum wage. If I could just say, if I don't know how much more time I have, I would like to go into one program that the PT governments did, is called PAA, in which they required all public hospitals and public schools to purchase in small towns and rural areas across the country to purchase all of their food items for their meals from family farmers. You know? Okay, so I'll just stop there. I could go on and on about this subject, so I apologize.
Yes, it's great that you uh, laid out the wheel, that there are so many factors involved, right? It wasn't just giving the money, but there was so many other policies in place that allow to these whole changes to take place. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. Brian mentioned about agencies. So our next topic is more about democracy and representation. This past Thursday, during the presidential debate, President Donald Trump accused the former Vice President Joe Biden of being in the government for 47 years and not doing a thing for the black community. And President Trump has always presented himself as an outsider capable of solving the country's political, social, and economic challenges. And I think he's going to use the same rhetoric, and he's using the same one as in 2016. So I'd like to turn to David now. David, today it seems that the poor and the working class do not believe that the political establishment can meet their needs. What do you think is Lula's role and relevance in steering the progressive left in organizing power to meet these challenges?
Yeah, I think Lula is a indispensable force for the left. Obviously globally, I think it should be mentioned too that all this destruction that we have seen in South America over the past few years, right? There is no doubt, for example, that the coup in Bolivia or the really overt attempts at a coup in Venezuela would be happening if Lula and PT were in power. There's no doubt about that. So that's just his important global role. I think that Lula, as a politician, gives the American left a lot of lessons. One, as Brian was mentioning earlier, a kind of systematic perspective on how we deal with problems is something that we can definitely learn from. But also the fact that Lula is a working class politician means so much. It really, really does. As somebody myself who comes from a working class background, I understand the disillusionment that most people feel for the political class, because you recognize that these people are not very interested in looking out for your long-term interest. It's disgusting that Donald Trump is making the arguments that he's making about the black community just because Donald Trump has no interest in helping out the black community. But there is a truth to the fact that the Democratic Party has not provided what it's claims to provide to people. And I think most people, America has, one of the lowest voter turnouts in the, major democracies. And that is because there is so much disillusionment. You compare that though to somebody like Lula, who not only had a lot of political skill, but was very much rooted in a group of people in a working class. And I think that's going to be the only way that we're going to be able to push anything different forward to the United States. Look at think of somebody like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Democrat, longtime politician, and her failure to advocate for people when it comes to getting more stimulus payments, during this crisis. They don't understand the lived reality of most working class people. So when the United States gave out these $1,200 stimulus checks to people in the pandemic, do you know what most people used that for? Around 18% of them use those to basically just buy food and take care of themselves. But something around 35% of people who got that money used it to pay down debt. And actually, private people who own private debt, this has been an incredible time for them, because now they can come after people for their money. And as Brian was mentioning earlier, increasing the minimum wage and increasing the money that goes into working class people's pockets is good for the economy in whole, because they buy goods and services from real people, unlike the rich, who just basically buy more property and assets like that also really hurts people because it means that property values go up so that most working class people could not be able to afford rent or homes or anything like that. That kind of you know, and you listen to the way that the Democrats are talking about for their stimulus. They are so fixated, you know, on this idea that like what was done with these $1,200 stimulus checks, that they weren't thinking about things like preventing, you know, private debtors, you know, people who own your debt from basically coming after you for this kind of payment, right? We need that kind of perspective. And Lula was a great example of that. And that was something that we started to see with Bernie Sanders, and we're starting to see more and more working class politicians show up in the United States. And that's going to be very important for the future. But you know, we really need to look at the example of what happened in Brazil and how successful that PT government was, not only in, you know, its achievements, but also in its ability to sort of broaden the political you know, arena to include a lot of people who had been disenfranchised for so long. And we're going to need that kind of radical revolution in the United States as well, where we're starting to see more working class people show up, not just, you know, people from an elite class who have some sympathy. We actually need working class communities to be electing people from their community who share their perspective and to understand, you know, what it's like to struggle in this country, because for the vast majority of people, that's their experience. And, you know, it's very clear that most people are disillusioned with politics because they don't believe that politics can change their lives. One of my friends, Ronan Burtonshaw, who is the editor at Tribune magazine in the UK, he has a line that I love so much. He says, the job of the left, the job of socialists, the job of progressives is to convince people that politics can change their lives. And that's what we need to start doing right now, is to help people understand that we can win power. We just need to start getting organized and to push back against these people who have, you know, feel entitled to our votes and our support.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to turn to Brian with this same topic of agency. So Lula defines himself as an idea more than anything else. What can you tell the American people about this idea and why it matters?
Okay, Lula defines himself as an idea, and this is one of the things that the opposition, the right, doesn't understand. You know, he is the, I would say, like the living spokesperson of a broad coalition of labor union and social movements that joined together during the end of the military dictatorship in the early 1980s, and together worked to influence strongly the Brazilian Constitution of 1989, or 88, I'm sorry, which is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. Just to give an example, it stipulates that property has a social function, which is more important than the profit motive, which in real terms means that if someone is sitting on empty buildings, scofflaw properties like you have all over the inner cities and the downtown areas of cities across the United States, and this person hasn't paid real estate taxes for a few years, anyone who doesn't own a piece of property can move in and start squatting and pressure the local government to convert it into ownership-based low-income housing. Like, this is a constitutional right because of this movement that pressured to create people's amendments to the Constitution while it was being created through 1 million signatures on different items like this one, constitutional item, you know, Article 182. So in that sense, Lula represents this movement and the will of these people, working class social movements and labor unions. And some of the things that Lula, the idea, stands for are, first of all, sovereignty as a people. The Brazilian people have a right to be actors. You know, Brazil has a right to be an actor on the global stage. One of the principles that Lula represents is equal opportunity for education. You know, while the PT was in power, they passed the most aggressive affirmative action program in history, which guarantees 50% of all slots in free public universities to people from the working class, with a small additional differentiation for race. Okay, so 50% of the students, you know, the percentage of Afro-Brazilian students in the university system quintupled during the PT years. Lula, the idea, stands for the idea that everyone has the right to wake up in the morning and have a good breakfast, to have a good lunch, and have a good dinner. And this is the thing that, like, you know, there's a lot of criticism from the left of the sacrifices that the PT government's made, and that, you know, that they only had 22% in Congress at the height of their powers, and so they had to go into coalition with more conservative parties and things like that. But the one thing that Lula never gave up on was the idea of eliminating hunger, you know, and they succeeded. The UN took Brazil off of the world hunger map, you know, and it's coming back on now. So I'd say those are some of the principles of Lula, the idea. Okay, I'll just stop there. I could go on and on, but I know we're pressed for time, so I'll just stop there.
I think, yes, I can, you know, I think, you know, what you just said, and also what David was saying before, I think is a good segue for these questions, that it is about the elections, right? We are finally, we are just few days away from the U.S. elections, right? And a lot it's at stake right now, you know, for both for the American people as for the rest of the world, right? You know, we are dealing with a horrible pandemic, issues of climate change, and so much more. So I think my question is for those, right, for those people who have not yet committed to go and vote. I mean, we are seeing a great, you know, early voting, right? And that's very, I think, hopeful, right? Unfortunately, with long lines, the system is just not really adequate, right? And I hope that there does not turn up people off. But what can you say, right? And this question is for both of you, and maybe David can start and then Brian. But what can you say to those people who are not yet committed to vote to go out and vote on November 3rd?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's tough right now. I think, in my opinion, we have to get Donald Trump out. I think that he is an unbelievable danger to the globe, and you know, that's what I'll say about that. It's very frustrating, obviously, that the alternative is Biden, because I actually don't find Biden to be somebody who is going to be a liberatory force at all, and in a lot of ways is going to continue the same kind of very damaging policies. But what we do have an opportunity to do now in the United States that we haven't had in a really long time is to support all of these insurgent working class movements that are putting up more progressives and more left-wing governments. I'll just tell a quick, like very briefly, where I'm from. I'm from Austin, Texas. Okay, you know, I'm from Austin, Texas. You know, and people have opinions about Texas being a red-wing state or whatever, a right-wing state. Sorry, but you know, there has been a very successful movement there that they have essentially come close to taking over the city council. And we've seen these massive protests across the country demanding for changes to the way that we do policing in this country. And one of the major demands has been to defund the police. There's one city in the United States that has actually defunded the police, and that's Austin. And why did that happen? Because a couple years ago, a bunch of radicals said, we're going to start putting up radical working class candidates, people who are, you know, Mexican-American immigrants who have deep roots in their community, and they were able to win. And now we're in a position where you have a social demand to defund the police, and then you have people in power who can follow through. And I think that that is the kind of perspective that you have to take into voting, is that we can put into people who we can pressure and we can win demands from.
Great. And Brian, could you see?
Yeah, well, I find it very frustrating, you know, because Biden was an actor in the 2016 coup in Brazil. And he did fly down to meet with Michel Temer 3 days after Dilma was removed from office to ensure him that the coup government had the entire support of the US government.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a bitter pill for me to swallow, you know, to have to feel like I have to vote for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like anyone in the US who's living in any kind of area where there's any chance that Trump might possibly win should definitely vote for Joe Biden. In my case, being registered to vote. I'm an overseas voter, registered to vote in Ithaca, New York, which is a very progressive town in a state where Biden is going to surely win. I'm voting for a third-party candidate because I think the system is all set up in the U.S. so that no third party can ever develop any kind of momentum. But I still think it's important to have other options at the very least, for the Democrats not to think that everyone on the left is going to vote for them no matter what, you know?
Well, it's a tough one, I think, for all of us, right?
Yeah, and just like as a fun fact, for voters in California or states where it might be safe, Leonard Peltier, who is a American Indian movement activist, is on the ballot in a couple of states. So if you are going to put in a vote that you want to put in the category of social protest, that's a good one to throw it into.
He's great.
Yeah.
But there are some fundamental differences between Donald Trump and Biden in relation to America also. I still think Biden's a little bit better than Trump.
Yeah, I think it's really clear at this point that what Trump is willing to do is to just let not only the United States burn, but the whole world burn down.
Yeah, I think that's the one of the biggest concerns, right? It is how far he's willing to go to kind of save himself.
Right. So talking about anti-democratic movements and to stop them, right? I would like to ask you guys, maybe starting with David first. Today, a big portion of the media is concentrated in the hands of big corporations. Most of them are American, which have great influence in the public opinion. And what do you think can be done to stop this group from putting democratic values under risk?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Just really briefly too, not only is there this massive, concentration on the national media scale, but local media is just dying. There are very few local publications, and if you are a corrupt or a nasty right-wing state senator or in a state house, this is the perfect time to just gut programs and to commit real damage to people, because these local organizations have just been so decimated. That's just something that we should also remember. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's a reason that wealthy Americans understand that owning a newspaper allows you to control votes and to control people's minds and control people's perspectives. That's a huge power. And now we're also living in this moment where not only do we have this concentration of media, but now we also have the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, are controlled by a small group of people. One of the publications that I do videos for, Jacobin, they just had their videos pulled off of Facebook because they mentioned Bolivia or Marx. They're basically allowing these unelected group of people out in Silicon Valley, they're giving them, our system is giving them the opportunity to decide what kind of media is, true or false. And I'm sure Brian is very familiar with this kind of fight that we're having. So that's a real problem. Luckily, there are more and more independent organizations that are using, new technologies that we're getting, through the internet and social media to be able to create our own audience. I mean, that's what my show essentially is. We're funded by our listeners, and we're able to provide a different perspective. And I think there's no doubt that the reason that we were able to cover what was happening in Brazil and also this year what was happening in Bolivia was the fact that we were an independent outlet that was able to do our own analysis without having an interested party have, your boss gets a call and tells you, okay, we need to cut this story because it's, too critical of the United States or whatever. Independent media, I think, is going to have to be, our strategy going forward, but also, not fetishizing it just being small. We need to have independent media, but we need to try to make it as big as possible and have its reach as large as possible too.
Excellent. Yeah. Brian, would you respond to that question as well? What do you think that can be done, especially that you are living in Brazil and you saw the process of Bolsonaro, how he became elected, right?
Well, Brazil has a very large and robust independent left media, which is better organized and larger than the United States, even though it has 2/3 of the population of the US. For example, the YouTube channel I comment on is 247. We have 600,000 YouTube followers, over 1 million on Facebook and things like that. The problem is that the algorithms are beginning to destroy everybody. You know, we saw 2 of our best left indie media companies fold in the last 2 months. Conversa Fiada, which had like 1.5 million Facebook followers and was unable to keep going, and Knockout, you know? And so I think it's really important, as David mentions, yeah, the mainstream local media is all going out of business too. And I think it's important to try and find alternatives to these big Silicon Valley companies, which are all owned by right-wingers. You know, like Mark Zuckerberg, he goes out and dines with white supremacists. You know, he donated 20 people to the Trump campaign in 2016. So it's obvious that they're beginning to damage the left media that's tried to build some kind of counter-hegemonic space in these areas of action offered by these right-wing Silicon Valley billionaires. You know, so I think it's really important that we find alternative technologies. And I also think on the left, it's really important to realize that you're never going to be that successful in affecting any kind of like socialist revolution using a company owned by a Silicon Valley billionaire. They're always going to find a way to damage you. You can't think that just being on YouTube, is going to affect this huge progress towards socialism, no matter how many followers you have. What really has to be done is political organization with the poor and the working class, and especially, as Franz Fanon used to point out, the lumpen proletariat. Because as we see in Brazil, with the fading away of liberation theology, due to censorship from Cardinal Ratzinger in the 90s, there's this gaping hole left in the favelas and in poor rural communities in which nobody was doing organization work with the youth anymore. And into that vacuum stepped fascism, far-right versions of evangelical Christianity, you know. And so it's an example of what can happen if you stop doing this political organization. What I see in the US is a lot of concentration of leftists in the big cities. And in these rural areas where everyone's supporting Trump, nobody trusts the mainstream media. But there isn't enough political mobilizing going on of actually like talking to people, you know, interacting with people, moving to some crappy community in the middle of nowhere where, you know, and working to mobilize people. You know, using some of the, just because the internet's here doesn't mean you have to abandon all of the traditional techniques of political mobilization, you know, laid out by people like Saul Alinsky in the United States. I mean, that stuff still also works, as the 2018 elections in Brazil showed, when Haddad, despite being completely slandered in the media on a daily basis for years, still got 44 million votes because people were knocking on doors, talking to each other at bus stops, doing all of those traditional political mobilization techniques, you know, that a lot of people in the newer left are kind of like abandoned, and they're just chirping at each other on Twitter instead.
Excellent. Yeah, we did have a great picture of what how these corporations can influence and change the democracy, right?
Yeah.
And elections, interfere with elections. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, thank you so much. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, David. You know, for doing this interview with us. I think it was great. I'm going to watch again and again and again. I think there is so much more for us, and to talk. And I truly hope that this is just the beginning of this dialogue, and that we can have you guys together again to continue this discussion, right? And so I also want to thank everybody who is watching us virtually, and all those who will watch this later on. And now I would like to invite all who are in New York City to come to the second annual Lula Day art exhibition. This year it's called Brazil-US Struggles and Resistance. It's looking at the parallels, parallels of the struggle and resistance both in the US and in Brazil, right? for those who, so the exhibition is taking place at a gallery in front of City College at 1608 Amsterdam Avenue, right in front of City College, and we will practice all the safety guidelines. We are planning also for those who don't feel comfortable going in, that all this show will be, will be presented outside through video as well. There's going to be some music. It's going to be great. It is, it has 20 artists, great, amazing, socially engaged artists, both from Brazil and from the US. And it's quite an interesting collaboration and a great show. For those who are not in New York City, we are going to show a video of the exhibition right after this interview. And it's kind of a teaser.
Christina, yeah.
Everyone's mics off at once.
Yes. So just to say that we will show this video after, and also after this video.
We're having an internet issue here. Yeah. So yeah, it's being cut off, Christina. Yes, that's all. Thank you so much. It was great to have you both here with us. We are going to show a video clip of the exhibition, followed another video clip from the Tropas de Palhaços de Quinta. It's a group, a performance group from Brazil. So if you stay tuned, you're going to enjoy a little bit of the gallery walk that we're going to have, and then the performance. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, David. If you would like to say a few words now, feel free.
Thank everybody here. It's really beautiful. I just want to, take a second and remember, our friend Michael Brooks, who just passed this year. He really was a believer in Lula and the movement there. And, we can all just hope to continue that spirit and fight going forward.
Okay, yeah, I'd just like to say also, like David, I'm really impressed and pleased that you guys have managed to carry on the torch, that was lifted by Michael. And I'd like you to send my love to his sister Lisha, and good luck with the program. I see it's getting better and better, So, all right, and also Christina and Sonia, thanks a lot, and thanks for all the great work you're doing.
Yeah, seriously, this was wonderful.
Lula livre.
Olá, tivemos um problema com o som no vídeo, então acho que vamos tentar novamente ou resumir o vídeo com som. We had a little problem with the sound with our video, so we'll try to show it again with sound, and if not, that's what can be done. Okay, so let's give a few minutes. I think our activist from Collective as well, Maria Friedland, is working with us on this. She's doing a great job and trying to resolve this problem. Also with Renan Vandão e Roberto. Let's see. There you go. It seems we had some technical difficulties again. Let's give just a few moments and see. I hope we can return. There is some more great things to see. Okay. The technical difficulties continue. Let's continue trying. That's all we can do.
Boa noite, senhoras e senhores. Eu sou o palhaço Zé Catimba, da Tropa de Palhaços de Quinta. E hoje nós viemos aqui para celebrar o Lula Day. Nós, a Tropa de Palhaços de Quinta, estamos com o presidente Lula há muito tempo. Nós estivemos na Ilha de Santa Rita, lá em Paraty, no triplex da Globo, e escrevemos Globo Golpista nas areias da praia. A Tropa de Palhaços de Quinta também está com o presidente Lula desde sua condução coercitiva no ano de 2016, com o Parlamento Popular dando a pauta política e jurídica para a população do Brasil e criando o debate nas ruas. A Tropa de Palhaços de Quinta também abriu o Festival Lula Livre nos Arcos da Lapa, no Rio de Janeiro. E é com muito orgulho que nós estamos aqui hoje para celebrar o Lula Day. E agora eu gostaria de apresentar os nossos palhaços, nossos atores, nossos músicos. Com vocês, a palhaça revolucionária Luciana Pedroso.
Trabalhadores do mundo, univos!
Eu gostaria também de apresentar o nosso palhaço preto Bida Nascimento.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole way through. Just a little sweet song, get Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I sing Georgia, Georgia, a song of you. Come as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine. On the eye, reach out to me. On the eyes, smile tenderly. Still with peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you, and I sing Georgia, Georgia. No peace I find, just a little sweet song. It's Georgia on my mind. I can't breathe.
E por último, eu gostaria de apresentar a nossa palhaça, Débora Qualquer, Bárbara Vento, que representa os povos da floresta do Brasil.
Respirar, não posso mais nadar. Terra está morrendo, não dá mais pra plantar. Se plantar não nasce, se nascer não dá. Até pingada boa é difícil de encontrar. Não posso respirar, não posso mais nadar. A terra está morrendo, não dá mais pra plantar. Se plantar não nasce, se nascer não dá. Até pingada boa é difícil de encontrar. Cadê a flor que tava aqui? Poluição comeu. Peixe que é do mar, poluição comeu. Veja onde é que está a poluição comeu. Nem o Chico Mendes sobreviveu. Avisa pro ministro quem é o Chico Mendes.
E a tropa de palhaços de quinta continua na luta com o presidente Lula, aguardando ansiosamente o julgamento da suspeição do juiz Sérgio Moro pelo Supremo Tribunal Federal. E a tropa de palhaços de quinta deseja um feliz aniversário ao presidente Lula. E viva o Lula Day!
So everybody, thank you, and free Lula!